Amazing, it works. Hello everyone and welcome to another Anchore open source gardening live streaming session where we go through some of the issues that need a bit of a conversation, and we welcome everyone to join us and have a chat with us and ask us questions about all the wonderful products that you find under the Anchore banner. They're listed down in the bottom corner of the screen there with the handy GitHub URLs. There's another couple of URLs you might want to look at. Anchore.com/open source. There's a couple of links there, videos showing you how to use Syft and Grype. There's also our GitHub repositories, which are all located on github.com/Anchore. And then more recently, we have a new discourse site, which you can get to just by going to anchor.com/discourse. I put a post in for each week that we do this live stream, and in there it's got all the links to everything, and also there's a time correct link for wherever you are in the world. So for me it's 8 o'clock, for you it might be something different. And down here we put the topics that we're going to be discussing, which is links down here, which I'll open in just a minute. I'll get to that in just a sec, and if you have any questions, ask them in the chat. We'll try and keep an eye on that. A few of us have got the chat open. Right, before we actually start doing any work, I just want to say hello to everyone. You can see if I put my mouse over the window, you can see everyone's names. We've got Will, Chris, Dan and Keith. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? We haven't spoken to each other at all in the last recent few minutes or anything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see you all. Yeah, I haven't seen you all for recently. Sweet. So these are our developers who work on all the wonderful open source stuff at Anchore. Should we dive in? Again, like I said, you can follow along by clicking the links down in this discourse post. I'll put the post in the chat so people can get that and follow along. So what I've done is I've picked out just those that are flagged needs discussion, and rather than me pick them and get the wrong ones like last time, I thought maybe you guys could tell me which ones are like top of your list. I know a couple of these were tagged fairly recently, so let's just dive in.
We can go right from the top. That was one that we had in our triage meeting this week, and I wanted to get specifically, I think, Dan, Nermi, and Keith's input on this, since Will probably is tired of hearing my voice about this one, and Alan, you were also there. So I'll keep this brief. The title of this issue is a little incorrect. We're not missing the relationships, but we are labeling them as contains. So if you think of the SBOM as a graph, the parent project that we're scanning for NPM has a direction of one to many. This thing contains these dependencies, right? However, the user thinks that we should also include the relationship dependency of, and that would be the many to one of all of these packages would then have another edge going the opposite direction back towards the parent package that says I'm a dependency of this thing. That would increase our relationships by double, the amount, or n number of dependencies for a given project. We would add n number of edges back towards the source. I thought we had come to the conclusion that we only did single direction graphs for the SBOM currently. I thought we didn't want to go both ways, but I wanted to open this up to discussion of do we want to do it this way? And I thought Alex would be here, and he was the primary audience I wanted to address this to, but if you guys have input, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just go do this.
I mean, I think one thing is that like labeling these as dependency relationships is good. I mean, one of the other things is that when we output Cyclone DX, the only parts of the graph that we output are dependency things. So without having like in our internal model have those labeled as dependencies, then Cyclone DX doesn't get any sort of a graph information. So I mean, it's definitely good, I think, to include that. Is this one of those that has both way options in the SPDX? Like there's like maybe like is dependency or is dependency of or something?
That's correct. It has both ways in the relationships, but I think you just convinced me of putting it in because of the Cyclone DX concerns, which I didn't even think about or come to mind for when we did this issue. That like the way we currently produce Cyclone DX, it will not be as expressive unless we have these dependency of relationships at the core level, the Syft JSON level of the SBOM. Dan, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I have a question, and forgive me if it's off track, but is it possible to compute what's being asked for given the information we have today? Because we have one direction, right? The top level package contains a lower level package, and we have, parent-child contains that stuff in the artifact relationships. So is it possible to compute the other way around? Like if you were to have one of these SBOMs with a correct artifact relationships, you actually just calculate the other way without having to store it in the SBOM itself? Or are there ecosystems where you can't easily compute it because the graphs aren't symmetric?
I think both. So I think there are ecosystems where the graphs are not symmetric where you wouldn't be able to compute it. For the specific example of this issue, for the NPM, like when we parse a package.json, you can say authoritatively that for this larger package that we're scanning, the packages that are in the dependencies array are a dependency of that parent package. So yes, there are ecosystems where it's not easy to compute this. For the one that we're talking about, we could just add this in. Does that answer your question?
I think so, because what I'm trying to get to is like, if the SBOM, like what's in the SBOM document is one thing, versus if it can be computed, then it doesn't necessarily have to have both representations stored in the document. It's just we need a mechanism for computing the information when asked for it or when it's needed. But that's different from if the answer is it can't be computed from the information that's currently in the SBOM, it has to be calculated at the time of cataloging, then that's different. Then you'd have to store both representations.
Right.
Did I hear correctly that you said that we are currently adding contains relationships for these dependencies?
Yeah, and that was the second thing I wanted to kind of follow up for this discussion before we move to the next one. Is contains the correct thing here, or should we move to what Keith offered, which is depends on and dependency of? Those are the two semantic, one way versus another way edges that should be used in this case to describe this scenario. And I think we're just holding it wrong as far as the SPDX spec by using the contains.
That's what I think too. I mean, so this, as far as I understand it, we would only surface these if we were scanning like a package lock.json. Is that right? Because if we scan package.json, that's when we only pull out the top level package. I think I may be wrong.
Yeah, I can't speak to that right now because I have to look at the code for the package.json, but I was under the impression it was the opposite way. Let me see if I can get a quick answer for that. But even if we did, even if we're let's hand wave and say we're only doing it for package lock.json, the correct semantic should be dependency of and depends on, and we should just eliminate the use of contains. I don't think I wanted to also ask if anybody here had context as why we use contains in the first place, because I couldn't find where it got any discussion on why we used it, or if there was consistency with other ecosystems, or basically I couldn't find the answer to the question. I wanted to see if anyone knew why we used it.
I'm pretty sure the answer to that is that we only had contains at one point. And we more recently added the dependency relationship type and started surfacing things that were dependencies. I think that's.
Yeah, originally the contains were for things like RPMs, where it's some other higher level metadata describing a piece of software, and it contains a bunch of stuff, files that are all part of that software package. That's not a dependency. Like an RPM doesn't depend on one of the binaries it has installed. It contains that binary, right? So I think that's probably where it came from.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up with a comment on this issue that says, hey, we're going to move forward. We're going to do both directions for the graph. We're going to move contains to depends on, and we're going to move the artifacts that we're servicing, we're going to replace contains with dependency of, or sorry, flip the statement that I just said, but move to the semantically correct relationships and upgrade the cataloger.
Yeah, and just to like double click I think we should do the whichever one makes them. I think there's like depend. I looked this up a second. Yeah, depends on. So like that's like from the parent to the child, like with the depends on. So like I don't think we necessarily need to use dependency of if the depends on. I think is the way our relationships will be set up. I mean they're like kind of the same, but like we should just be consistent with the way we're doing contains probably, and like use the parent to child type relationships instead of child to parent type relationships.
Cool. I'll get that added. Does anyone have anything else to talk about for this issue, or are we good?
You can remove the needs discussion if that's the end of that one.
I will. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Which one next? Are we just going in order, or opened 2 hours ago? So that sounds like a good idea. This was one we had a conversation about the DLLs. I think this was you and me, Will.
I recall this one. This person also filed something on Grype, which were like prompted this.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. So I think that the sort of a summary of the issue here is that if you use like exif tool, if you look at the like file metadata or the SSL DLL that's inside this NuGet package, then it has like product name, the OpenSSL toolkit, like with capital letters and spaces. And we make there we go, product name, the OpenSSL toolkit. And that causes Syft to make a fairly garbage CPE. It should probably be like CPE:23:A OpenSSL or something. And so the reason I wanted to discuss it is because I wanted to understand if we could do better cataloging here, because the user mentions in this issue a distinction between .NET assemblies, which we have a cataloger for, and natively compiled Windows DLLs, which I think get picked up by the .NET assembly cataloger, and it reads some of the same metadata. And so I think the question is, I think there are sort of two questions in my mind. One is, can we, like, if we wrote a new cataloger, would this fix it? And the other is, should we have a different sort of cataloger? But this again is sort of the general case of like, it reminds me a lot of all these like jar misidentification problems where like there is a metadata file zipped up in the thing that has the wrong name. And it's really, really hard to write a tool that defends against that because we don't know, I'm sorry, the DLL is mislabeled. It's very hard to write a tool that figures out, so yeah, I think I don't know. Does anybody know more about, anybody have more context than I do? It looks like Chris added some stuff. Chris, did you learn anything interesting working on this?
Yeah, it's the bottom part is I think the important thing that I learned when I was experimenting with it. This isn't specific to the NuGet cataloger, right? If we run into anything that has this DLL extension, then there is some shared Syft logic that can inspect or inform what the greater package is of what's being scanned, right? We want to extract this logic from NuGet or from cataloger specific things and just have a package that can parse DLLs, right? And have an answer about the metadata within it. That's the long and short. I don't think we should be hiding this like under the covers of catalogers, because I think that leads to weird issues like this, where it starts by saying weird CPEs generated for OpenSSL for .NET. If instead, it's spread out across all the catalogers, and we have a standardized way of saying this is correct or this is not for certain packages like OpenSSL, then we can start moving towards crafting better CPEs. I think the other thing too is that while we're implementing that very general approach to like describing and pulling metadata from DLLs, we should possibly implement just like a catch-all of packages of, hey, I recognize that this DLL is from OpenSSL. I know this is the CPE that should be generated, like the CPE index that we use. Because otherwise, if we just try our hand wave best at generating these, we're going to get a lot of junk if we spread this across other ecosystems. Sorry, I'm finishing writing this comment, and then I'll have more to add.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I wasn't sure I followed the particular suggestion of like what we should do instead of like trusting the product name field in the XF data.
I've looked at this in depth some time ago, and the one thing that I will say is that the type of information that's in here is like very akin to the Java jar manifest, where some people put some things in field X and some people put it in field Y. And this is a perfect example that like we don't actually have any string that is the thing that we should be using for the CPE in this particular case in any of those fields. And so, I mean, we can certainly like do a thing like we're doing in Java where it's like, hey, look, I got a known thing that's like the OpenSSL toolkit or something like that, and then have some hard-coded map that's there, or even a dynamic data set or whatever. We could take that kind of approach, but I mean the biggest challenge here is that like none of that data actually even exists in the thing we're scanning. So without some external data, we'll never get the CPE right.
Right.
To follow up with what I was saying, I agree with Keith that in that case we're not going to get the correct CPE. But if you guys go to that code link that I have in my comment, and you can see on line 23, it starts with parse.net portable executable. That means that like we're only running into this when the .net cataloger is fired, right? And if you then scroll down, you see how we have pe.newbytes on 29. There's the PE file. We call pe.parse on 36. And then eventually we pull out on 43 the version resources, and we send those down into build.net package. If you keep scrolling further down, yeah, and now on 72 through 78, you can see when we wrote this cataloger, or when this cataloger was contributed, there are very specific fields that we're ripping out of these version resources. So we're already we are on this very hyper specific path of it has to be in the .NET context. It has to be a DLL within a .NET package. It has to be parsed correctly, and we're only looking for specific fields. So if we were to extract this and say, all right, I just want to do general things with DLL files and find all the metadata that it's able to spit out at me, we would have something where we can get some slice of all the metadata fields and then inspect that. Where I don't want to make the next connection is I don't want to use those to craft CPEs. I want to use those to match against like an index of packages that we maintain, whether it's the CPE like the CPE cataloger or the CPE index or something where we know the correct CPE, and we go, if these metadata fields match a known package of this thing, then we're going to provide that CPE rather than crafting it and building it and mushing and trying to like get into this weird state of pushing strings together to get what is invariably going to be just an incorrect thing that doesn't match against anything. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Will, does that
it does make sense. I wonder if rather than trying to like fingerprint the like XF metadata or whatever, if a digest would also make sense. I don't know if there's anything like Maven Central to like take a SHA-1 and say it is this thing. But yeah, that makes sense. So I think it sounds like what you're saying is that like we have this like .NET Portable Executable cataloger, and we found some .dll stuff and it ended up being parsed as if it was part of the like .NET Portable Executable cataloger, which makes specific assumptions. And maybe if we rolled back those assumptions, then and had like a lookup table based on more fields in the version resources, then we could get better data. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to raise hand. I meant the thumbs up. Yes, big thumbs up to that.
Okay.
I think this issue points at readdressing the cataloger in that exact way, where we're not making these same assumptions. We're kind of rolling those back a bit. We're not generating CPEs in this way, and we're hopefully identifying packages in at least a like. I'm not trying to get to a general sense of this. Like OpenSSL is a huge package, right? If we can just match correctly against that with a bit of code that says, I found these metadata fields and these named resources in this parse.dll. I know it's not called the OpenSSL blah, blah, blah. I know this is called OpenSSL and should be this. I'm going to put that in for the package. That's a step at least Syft getting better while we try and figure out, some of the more popular packages that should be being matched correctly rather than, again, ripping out these metadata fields from the DLL and throwing it up to the program's best guess.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's really a way to get away from using these in some cases, but I mean, so if I hear correctly, though, like essentially what you're saying is like we should kind of do the same thing Java's doing, and like have some known things that we can correctly get the CPEs for, and then like what about the stuff that isn't in that list? Like just fall back to having poorly generated CPEs, and then we'll add them to the list if it's an important thing that we that somebody tells us about. But I don't really see much else that we can do here. I mean, for this particular problem. Maybe I'm just not understanding.
Well, not for now, but Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your proposal goes along the line of some of the fingerprinting we've talked about in the past, but not necessarily from a digest perspective, from like a metadata perspective.
Yeah.
This constellation of metadata is stable across different versions of said software for a given ecosystem. Thus, we can develop a heuristic that says we can map that constellation of metadata to the correct CPE identifier, at least, and have this a subsystem where rather than having just lists of hard-coded things like we have today for some of these anomalies, try to develop a mechanism that can take in as input metadata, can consult a data source that we curate and outputs CPEs.
I think that
along the lines of what you're talking about.
It's close to that. Like I think we can even take a step further back from the complexity of fingerprinting and say, okay, how can we interact with our CPE generation, like the dictionary logic for the index? And if we have like a stable known key that we can build from packages like this, how can we inject that CPE dictionary into the assembly of these .NET packages and say, no, I don't trust the metadata in so much as pushing them all together to form a CPE from a .dll, but I do trust it enough to form its stability enough to form a key that can then look up CPEs in that dictionary and then assign those to the package, right? Yeah. So it's like you don't have to. You can build that. You can build that secondary system that you just mentioned, Dan, like fingerprinting and making like a SHA and having like a data set.
I was actually talking more about exactly what you're saying. Yeah, that kind of fingerprinting, not the SHA fingerprinting, but the metadata.
Yeah, leveraging the metadata in the DLL to then get an answer from the CPE-index.json, and like trying to figure out how we can interact with that dictionary to provide the correct answer for popular packages like OpenSSL.
Feels like some conclusion, but
sorry. Yes, I'm finishing the comment from the last one. I will write the comment for this one along those lines as well, and then I will not speak during the next one, so I don't get the next comment. Thank you. Okay, awesome.
That's not how it works, Chris. You know that. Right. Straight down to the next one. Supporting generating SBOMs for specific PNPM workspace packages. Was this
This is an interesting one.
Okay.
This isn't, I mean, if memory serves, I think I've looked at this one before. And the ask is, so they have, and there's some other things too, which I'll mention, but they have the project, directory structure like they show there. And so today what Syft can do, you would say, oh, go, point it at the packages directory or the project root directory. And so it scans everything that's there and it gives you back, sub package 1 and sub package 2 and sub package 3. What they want to do is like take all of that context into consideration, but only generate an SBOM for the sub package 1. Now, the interesting thing about this is that some of that external context is needed to like generate any sort of a useful information, because it might be referencing files outside of that root directory, right? Like there might be an include like ... something or other to include something from a parent directory, from the sibling directory, that sort of a thing. And so like today they couldn't point it just at subpackage 1 because it doesn't have any of the other stuff in the file resolver to look for to get any of that additional information. So this is, I just want to also mention quickly before, this is exactly like the same problem with Maven, multi-module projects. If somebody wanted to generate one of the modules and generate an SBOM, they're using a parent that's up a directory, maybe some siblings that are, in sibling directories. But since we can't say, here's all of the files you can look at, but only start scanning at this one spot, then it's challenging to get, a useful, narrowly scoped SBOM for the particular thing that they're looking for. Sorry, that was a lot of talking, but does that make sense? As a problem statement, at least?
Mm-hmm.
I do love a hacky script. Oh my gosh. Oh my god, this is more than I expected. Holy crap.
I think it's just aggregating all of the package JSON information into one document. Is that what that script does? I don't know if you looked at it.
I think so. I think so.
It's just scrolling by, but it seems to me like that's what it's doing.
Mm.
Or something like that.
So, I mean, just kind of like thinking out loud here, what potentially in both of the kind of scenarios that I described, what potentially would be an interesting solution is if we said something along the lines of, hey Syft, here are the full set of files to consider. But then also, hey Syft, this is the directory that you should scan, which are separate things. Today, those are always the same thing. But if there was a way to make them two separate inputs, then theoretically they could have, sibling imports that Syft could follow, like the same thing for, Maven parent POMs and all that type of thing, where Syft could find all the subsequent information that it needs in the file resolver, but the actual catalogers don't go and catalog all the stuff outside of that main directory that they're asking for.
That's a really interesting idea, because I think it's highlighting the difference between the material you're trying to scan versus the context that's required, that's referenced by all that material, but isn't part of the actual thing you're trying to scan. Right now, those things are coupled in the implementation, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, to take that a little bit further, there are some things now that Syft does with, for example, reading your local M2 repository directory. And like, that's another thing of like, hey, this is context we want to provide Syft to be able to have access to, but it's not something that we want to scan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't necessarily have like specific solutions, but it seems like one solution would be somehow changing those, like separating those two things where the cataloging process potentially has a different directory than all of the things that are available. I mean, we have to take other things like steps further, probably like the NPM or package cataloger would have to know, follows, relative links in a certain way and all that kind of stuff. Like it wouldn't just immediately work, but it would be a path forward.
You clearly thought about this quite a bit.
A minute or two.
So do we have a path forward, or is this a hypothetical solution that needs a bit more investigation?
I don't think we have a path forward just yet. Yeah, I think definitely needs some more investigation.
Okay. Is it worth leaving a comment to let them know that we're still looking into this and, appreciate your patience and all that kind of good stuff? But yeah, there's certainly more investigation required.
I could try to come up with something there.
Where are we? We've got, we're halfway through. So that was that one, wasn't it? Full description. I think we've discussed this one.
Yeah, I'll remove the label from this one. That one's being actively worked on, actually. 0.
Nice. What about this one? I feel like we've talked about this one recently as well.
I don't know anything about this one. This one is
added last week. Okay, ignore me. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I think I asked the person a question and they answered. If we scroll down a little bit.
Sure thing. What was this about? Missing root node. Oh, okay.
And this sounds like a dependency track thing that it's very similar to some other things people have mentioned.
Right. I think this is, again, the person wants to display the base image and they want the base image to be in the SBOM, and we have an issue tracking that. Maybe this should be linked up with that one. And then I think they're also trying to use our SBOM in a particular tool that is making them miss the root node. That is calling out that they don't have the root node.
If it is dependency track, I think that the gist is that it uses the dependency information to build out a big graph. And if we don't have that, it just doesn't work. And so we're kind of limited in some ways because we just don't have dependency information that we feel comfortable about including at times, depending on the ecosystem and what got scanned. But for some of the things we probably can add it. But I mean, a good example of this is one thing that I don't think really want to even do is, so if we scan a container in the CycloneDX SBOM that we generate, there's a metadata component, which is the root component. If we scan an image, for example, that is a container type. And the dependency track is expecting that to have dependency references to the different packages that we found. But we don't really think that those are dependency references, at least from our prior conversations. Certainly they could be contains references, much like we were just talking about with one of the prior issues. But we don't really consider them dependency relationships. And so we're kind of at a bit of a stalemate that we don't want to include incorrect information, but then, people are unable to use the SBOMs we generate with certain tools because of that.
Is there a possibility for a template solution to this? Because it almost, because of what you just said, Keith, kind of leads me to think this is a Cyclone JSON for dependency track output format. Because it actually doesn't change the format, but it changes the structure of the data in the format to be compatible with a certain tool. Because it sounds like they just have a semantic where for a container image, the packages they consider to be a dependency of the container image, where our our default semantic is just a different, it is just different. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can introduce, you can have a Cyclone DX JSON this way or that way.
Yeah, a template thing might be a little bit tricky. I mean, we definitely could come up with something if we wanted to. I mean, another option could just be adding some sort of, configuration flag for the Cyclone DX output, for people who do need it to be in that, that particular format. I mean, really in the grand scheme of things, I think the only thing is for us to add dependency relationships from the image to all the packages. I think like that's the only specific thing that it needs to go there when I looked at it before. I mean,
Oh, that makes sense. So this
Yeah.
isn't, I misunderstood. This person doesn't want like the base image to be added to the SBOM. That's really hard, but they just want the image that was scanned to be added to the SBOM as sort of like a root of the graph that contains all the things. That's much more doable. I misunderstood that. I don't know. Should we just say it seems like the path forward here is to add another output type and write up a little like this is how we do that and put it in the backlog? Is that?
Or I think maybe where Keith was going is that to be able to add parameters to existing output types, because in either case, you're generating valid Cyclone DX, but that's just the format. This is about how the information within the format is structured.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Which I thought we'd had some conversation on before, like the general concept of being able to parameterize the output types for different, for compatibility reasons with different tools.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have things have been refactored in a way that it's fairly easy to pass configuration parameters down to the formats now too. So I would not be opposed to adding a flag that somebody could, flag/environment variable that they could use to get that behavior here. I think that makes sense for a path forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to capture that in a little note, in a comment down the bottom?
Yep.
Sweet. We've got a few minutes left, and I think this is the one you were referring to earlier, the issue we already have about base images, was it?
Yeah, and I think we discussed it recently.
Did,
Is there a recent comment as a result of this discussion? Looks like I asked if anybody knew of a data source, and somebody posted some information. So I don't know if this needs to discussion right now. Maybe it should switch back to just needs investigation, because I think someone should follow up with that last comment and see, I don't know, maybe those Stack Overflow questions answer what we need, or maybe use attestations or something.
Oh wow, you're all down the bottom now. How does that work? Oh God, Zoom, what are you doing? There we go. Okay, I'll remove the needs discussion because it comes up a few times. The last one, that's all of those. Then I did find one in Grype, which I think we've talked about as well.
Oh, it's on our discourse. Yeah, the one respond.
There we go. How can we make Grype's output more focused? Okay. What was it they were after? Oh, because they wanted to filter out stuff that has a certain severity. Yeah. So does that mean, we're happy to keep the conversation going over here on Discourse for now?
Yeah, I didn't read this person's reply. Can you scroll down just to see? Because I'm glad they engaged. I can send results to platform. If all severities and output, this leaves large JSON. Okay, so it's a size one size. Right. It's hard to send large chunks of JSON across the boundary of the network, and the thing that's receiving it is not happy when it's that large. Nice. Okay. So he thinks Grype is powerful. It's better than all the other results that he's using. So this just helps. This just makes his life easier. So
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I think as a first pass, like reducing the noise for Grype, if Grype is going to find a bunch of negligible things and it makes the output really hard to read, just saying, some sort of like severity above. I think that's pretty reasonable.
yeah, we have options that like the one he described in our other tools. I don't see why we don't just take his proposal as the first pass. Given that Grype is pre 1.0, like we should embrace the pre 1.0-ness of being able to make mistakes with flags like these. Throw it
Yeah.
in. If we enjoy it, great. If not, we'll put deprecated on it. We'll change it to the next iteration. But we shouldn't be scared of just throwing in flags like this and trying them out and taking the user's suggestions.
But we also want to make fail on sort of like imply ignoring below. I think that was another thing we talked about. But I think just having a flag to filter severity makes a lot of sense. We should probably start there.
Yeah, it's like the easiest commit to make too. Like that's a quick add.
I wonder if it's worth, given that you've said there's a bunch of issues that are related to this, I wonder if it's worth posting this link in a comment in some of these to like people who've already filed bugs, like let's all get together on one place and have this conversation, or whether there's been enough conversation in all of these. What do you think?
No, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea. I also think all these people are asking for the same thing, which is a fairly good signal that we should go do it.
Yeah. Open source doesn't usually give you a lot of signals, but when it does, they're very obvious. Yeah, if you're doing 321, I can take over the scribing for the rest of them in the background like a good gopher, and we can move on to other issues of the live stream.
Sweet. Thank you very much. So we got to the end of the Syft and Grype needs discussions, and we're nearly at the end of time, but we have time if you want to roll the dice and get a random one, or if you want to pick a project and we'll pick an issue from a specific project rather than have the entire randomizer pick for you. You choose.
My vote is the dice.
You want to trust the dice, do you? Okay. So find any issue in any project that was reported by an external person specifically. Oh, there we go. We found one. That's not fair.
It's Dan Perry.
Reported by someone who, okay, isn't a developer on these projects but works for Anchore. Yeah, okay. I'll allow it just once. This is enterprise, so should we? Yeah, okay, we'll skip that one. That's not open source. Try another one? No, it's only picking that one. Have I got a bug? No. Add option to exclude packages introduced from base layer. I think this is one that we were just talking about, isn't it? I believe.
Exclude packages from base layer would fall under as a secondary thing to do after the fact of identifying the base layer that we talked about. So this is
I don't think so. Well, I don't know. I mean, because if we have because it doesn't require identifying the base layer, right? Like we can look at the OCI image and see that we have different layers. And so if the user wants to tell us that like, hey, I don't care, or even taking the first layer, but I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it would
As long,
be.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, is if they can specify which layer they want to stop the scan at, I think we already have that information. The problem is, I'm not sure about that sentence right in the middle there. You know, I could only scan only the components of the latest / top layer. The top layer of a container image can be just nothing. Right? Because every command in a Docker file will generate a new layer, basically.
Right. So the top layer is work dear app or something.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that
exactly. The problem is you have to find the layers at which there are transitions between the arbitrary metadata of from this, and in multi-stage Docker files, it gets more complex. And
right. Because I think if you just do like,
yeah, which is why what Chris said, I think, is right. Like we have to figure out a mechanism for determining where those boundaries are in the list of layers that identify image boundaries.
if somebody had an image SHA today, like let's say the user wanted to do the work of identifying, they're just like, okay, I looked at the Docker build process and this digest, I want to ignore everything in a layer with this digester before. There's no way to tell Syft that today, right?
There isn't, but if the user did do the work and brought the information, Syft would be able to identify when a package was first seen. So you can.
Oh, that's true. So yeah, maybe this once, and maybe this is in the comments, but like maybe this wants a like little bit of Python or something to just like take the Syft JSON and drop all the packages where the like first seen in layer is what they consider the base image or something. Like I think you could do this after.
It is doable.
Yeah.
Premonition
is-
there.
And there we have a little bit of Python. Sorry, go ahead.
I love it.
I would also just like note that, I mean, something tangentially related here is it would be kind of cool to be able to do an SBOM diff.
Right.
So like if Syft had the way to do an SBOM diff, they could generate an SBOM with whatever base layer they care, they don't care about, generate one with their other one and, get a diff there. And there would be plenty of other uses for the SBOM diff outside of just that.
Yeah. I was going to comment on something similar. This might, it's a little internal, but the Anchore Enterprise has an approach for this because it does have that material. It has multiple SBOMs that it can do the layer set comparison and subsetting and the metadata about what those things are called, right? So a similar approach to that could be leveraged. So there is an approach to this that we have. It just requires more information than you have when you're just pointing the tool at one container image.
And yeah, I agree with what Dan said. Also, what you're finding in these comments too is we've been moved over to the design discussion of subtracting base image from top image. But I think the middle ground of using that script or adding a feature of like that script into Syft where it doesn't have to be done in the post-processing is a good step forward for something like this.
Yeah.
So it's already in the backlog. It's just tagged as an enhancement. There's nothing really more to do other than like find the time to work on it, I guess. Is that a yes? Sorry.
Oh, that is an emphatic yes. Yeah. More time,
Okay.
please.
Okay. More time. Let's do that. One more. We'll do one more before the end because. Ooh. Scan action.
That's cool.
I like this.
Oh,
Automatic
yes.
feedback of scan results as a PR comment.
I love the idea. It's in our backlog.
Right. Oh, this would be great. How many of these good first issues have we got on things like this? Oh, so there's a few on there. That's just on scan action, though. Nice. Okay. I'm just going to put that to one side. Right. That was the last one, and it didn't count because you just said it's in the backlog, so I'm going to pick one more. Oh, no. Oh, dear. Is this SLES by any chance?
Yeah. So this is an example of like right now Grype doesn't right now Grype has a class of false positive. I think we've talked about it before, but I'll try to explain it really briefly. So we have a language ecosystem matcher. Like there's a Ruby package, right? In this case, Ruby 2.5 standard library, that has a vulnerability. And if you scan if the SBOM has this Ruby package that we match against the GitHub security advisory, right? There's a GitHub security advisory that says, GHSA, whatever affects this Ruby 2.5 standard lib. But SUSE have published in /slash 15.5, that's SUSE Enterprise Linux or something. They have published a patch. So the RPM, if you do like zipper install Ruby standard lib at that version, you shouldn't get a vulnerable one. You should get a patched one. But we don't detect that. Basically, Grype makes two decisions. The first is that it regards the RPM as patched, and then the second, it finds the same files as a Ruby package and regards them as vulnerable. And this is like a known class of false positives. We have two paths forward for it. One is to ingest more SLES data so that we would trust ourselves to just remove the Ruby package. And the other path forward is to make the Grype matching process, make the matchers aware of each other so that we could write a business rule like an RPM, like ruling that an RPM is fixed overrides ruling that a language package is vulnerable. They're both viable. Yeah, so that's what this is. This is
It's
one of a fairly large number of
Right.
What's that?
It's a long-standing problem we've needed to solve, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's been solved. Like there's some per distro work. So like it's solved for Red Hat and a couple others. It is not solved for SUSE Linux right now.
Right.
Yeah. So I've been working on it a bit, but it's not done right now. I don't think there's anything to discuss on this issue, though. This issue is a special case of big thing we're already trying to fix.
Right. Awesome. I'm not going to pick another one. We can wrap up at that point, unless any of you have any comments or things to mention. I think everyone's had enough of staring at a camera. And I really appreciate you all spending the time explaining these things and us diving into these issues, because it really helps, especially when you see people moving those conversations onto discourse and then interacting and, coming up with ideas on how to improve things. It's great to see. So, and we love those people who come along and watch and leave a comment or ask questions or whatever. So yeah, if you want to find out more, you know where to go. github.com/Anchore. All the projects are in there. There's a lot of them. And maybe pick up Needs First Issue. I think maybe we should highlight some of those on Discourse and pick some that we'd really, really like to see done. Maybe prioritize some of those as, if you did that, you'd be our best friend, and we'd all do a little thumbs up. So thank you again. We'll see you all next week. We do this every week at the same time. Check out Discourse for all the details, which you'll find over here. See you all again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
for
Alan.
joining
Thanks,
us.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Ta-ra. Thank you.